You've got to be kidding me." The words cracked through the first-class boarding gate, sharp and deliberate, loud enough to turn heads. "Is this some kind of joke?" the woman continued, eyes narrowing as she pointed openly. "Because there's no way that belongs here." The girl didn't flinch. She stood just inside the velvet rope marking priority boarding for a commercial airline, her posture straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Her boarding pass was already scanned. The gate screen behind her glowed softly. First class, now boarding. Her name was Naomi Brooks, 16 years old, black, traveling alone. She wore a modest blazer over a simple blouse, no jewelry except a thin silver chain at her neck. She had been raised to speak politely, listen carefully, and never announce herself in rooms where arrogance mistook volume for authority. Airports had always been places of quiet observation for her, places where people revealed exactly who they were, under pressure. The woman confronting her stepped forward aggressively. She was Claudia Merritt, 47, white, a well-known CEO whose face appeared regularly in business magazines and airline lounge screens. Power followed her like perfume, expensive, overwhelming, and assumed to be welcome everywhere. She adjusted her tailored coat with irritation, scanning Naomi as though she were a stain on marble. Claudia let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, this is rich. Is this airline running a social experiment now? What's next? Letting kids play executive in the first-class cabin?" A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone chuckled nervously. Phones came out. Naomi remained still. Claudia leaned closer, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sweetheart, do you even know where you are? This isn't a school trip. This is first class. Real seats, real money, real people." "I'm aware," Naomi said quietly. That calm answer seemed to offend Claudia more than silence ever could. "Wow," she scoffed. "Confident too. That's cute. You know, I've seen this before. People slipping into spaces they didn't earn, hoping no one has the guts to call them out." She snapped her fingers at the boarding agent. "Check her pass. Again. Slowly this time." The agent hesitated, glancing at Naomi's ticket, then at Claudia's status badge, then back again. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "her boarding pass is valid." Claudia rolled her eyes. "Passenger rights don't include pretending you belong in luxury. Airline policy exists for a reason. Standards exist for a reason." Her voice rose deliberately so the entire gate could hear. "Do you have any idea how much a first-class seat costs?" she asked Naomi, as if speaking to a child. "Or did someone hand this to you like a free upgrade out of pity?" A man nearby looked down at his shoes. A woman pretended to read her phone. No one intervened. Naomi felt the familiar pressure. Not fear, but awareness. She had been taught moments like this weren't accidents. They were tests, and how you responded mattered more than how loudly you were attacked. "I paid what was required," Naomi said evenly. Claudia laughed again, sharper this time. "Oh, please, don't insult my intelligence. I fund partnerships on this airline. I know who flies first class, and it's not teenagers who look like they wandered in from economy." The words landed heavy, ugly, deliberate. She gestured toward Naomi's clothes. "You don't look like someone who understands executive space. This cabin is for people with discipline, money, influence, not this." The silence around them thickened. Security began to approach, slow and uncertain. "Miss," one officer said, careful not to look directly at Naomi, "could you step aside for a moment?" Naomi nodded and moved calmly away from the rope, not in surrender, but in control. She refused to give Claudia. The satisfaction of resistance. Claudia smirked. "See? Even she knows." Naomi stood beside the gate sign now, the words priority boarding glowing above her head. Eyes burned into her back. Judgment hummed in the air like static. Her phone vibrated softly in her pocket. She didn't answer. Instead, she breathed, slow, steady, remembering what her father once told her. Never confuse silence with weakness. Systems listen even when people don't. Claudia crossed her arms. Honestly, this airline's standards are slipping. First, they sell the image of exclusivity. Then they let anyone wander into the first-class cabin like it's a food court. She looked around theatrically. Is no one else concerned? Or am I the only one who still respects how things are supposed to work? No one answered. Naomi lifted her eyes, calm, unbroken. Her grandmother's voice echoed softly in her memory. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus. By 14:14. Claudia exhaled sharply. Finally, airline policy restored. But Naomi's stillness wasn't defeat. It was patience. And somewhere behind the walls of the terminal, beyond the glass, beyond the gate, systems far more powerful than Claudia Merritt were already awake. If you've ever been judged before you were known, dismissed before you were heard, then what happens next with this girl will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices to witness what real justice looks like. Because the next moment doesn't bring relief. It brings escalation, and privilege is about to expose itself even further. The boarding gate did not return to normal after Naomi stepped aside. It stiffened. Voices dropped into murmurs. The quiet hum of the terminal seemed louder now, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The boarding agent avoided Naomi's eyes, pretending to scroll through a tablet that no longer needed checking. Security stood half a step too close, close enough to be felt, not close enough to be justified. Claudia Merritt noticed everything. She always did. She adjusted her stance, reclaiming the center of the space like a performer stepping back onto a stage. Her discomfort from moments earlier had already dissolved into satisfaction. This was familiar territory. Pressure, hierarchy, compliance. Well, she said sharply, glancing at her watch, are we done with the confusion now? Some of us actually have places to be. The boarding agent cleared his throat. We just need to verify a few things, ma'am. Claudia raised an eyebrow. With her? She scoffed. What exactly is there to verify? She shouldn't have been allowed through in the first place. Naomi stood quietly, hands still clasped, eyes forward. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing into her shoulders, not just from Claudia, but from the silence of everyone else. Silence had a way of choosing sides without speaking. A woman in line leaned toward her companion and whispered, not quietly enough. This is awkward. Yes, the man replied, but she should have known better. Naomi heard that too. Claudia did not lower her voice. Look at her, she said, gesturing openly. She's standing there like she's entitled to an explanation. That's the problem these days. Everyone thinks they deserve first-class treatment without first-class credentials. The security officer shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we need to keep things calm. Oh, I am calm, Claudia snapped. I'm just pointing out what everyone else is thinking. She turned deliberately toward Naomi. You don't get offended, do you? I mean, I'm sure you're used to being told where you don't belong. The words were soft. The intent was not. Naomi felt a flicker in her chest. Not anger, not fear, resolve. She had been taught never to hand her dignity to someone who had done nothing to earn it. I'm not offended, she said quietly. I'm waiting. That answer landed wrong. Claudia laughed, sharp and dismissive. Waiting for what? A miracle? An apology? She leaned toward the boarding agent again. You're wasting time. Airline policy is very clear about who qualifies for priority boarding. If you let exceptions slide, you lose control, and control is everything. The agent nodded reflexively. Of course, ma'am. Naomi noticed that. The reflex. She noticed how policy was no longer neutral once fear entered the room. Another supervisor arrived, drawn by the growing attention. His badge gleamed under the terminal lights. He glanced at Claudia, recognition flashing across his face, then at Naomi, confusion following quickly after. What seems to be the issue? He asked. Claudia answered before anyone else could. The issue is that this airline is embarrassing itself. I'm a partner, a frequent first-class passenger, and I expect standards. Yet here we are, arguing over whether a child belongs in a first-class cabin. Naomi remained silent. The supervisor turned to her. "Miss, may I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi handed it over without hesitation. He studied it longer than necessary, scanned it once, then again. The screen beeped softly. Valid. Still, he didn't hand it back immediately. Claudia watched, satisfied. "See? Even you feel it. Something's off." The supervisor cleared his throat. "We just need to confirm—" "Confirm what?" Claudia interrupted. "That rules still matter?" Naomi finally spoke. "My ticket is valid." Claudia turned sharply. "Don't talk over him. That's rude." Naomi blinked once. "I wasn't." A few passengers exchanged glances. Someone began recording again, holding the phone higher now. Claudia noticed and smiled thinly. "Good. Let people see how this airline handles things." The supervisor handed the boarding pass back, reluctantly. "Everything appears to be in order." Claudia's smile faded. "In order?" she repeated. "So you're really going to let her on the plane?" "Yes, ma'am." The word ma'am sounded different this time. Weaker. Claudia stepped forward, lowering her voice but sharpening it. "If you do that, I'll be making calls. About training, about accountability, about how this airline has lost control of its own image." The supervisor hesitated. Naomi watched the hesitation closely. This was the moment where systems decided who they protected. Security shifted again. The supervisor exhaled. "Miss," he said to Naomi, "perhaps it would be best if you wait until the end of boarding. Just temporarily." Naomi understood immediately. This wasn't about policy anymore. This was about comfort. Claudia smiled. "There," she said softly. "Was that so hard?" Naomi nodded once. "I can wait." She stepped back another pace, now fully outside the boarding area. Applause did not come. Relief did. For everyone except her. Claudia straightened her coat and reclaimed her place at the front of the line. "Thank you," she said sweetly to the supervisor. "That's how you maintain order." Naomi stood alone near the window, the runway lights blinking beyond the glass. Planes moved with purpose out there, guided, precise, unquestioned. Her phone vibrated again. This time she looked down. She didn't answer yet, but she unlocked the screen, and the silence around her began to feel temporary. If you've ever watched authority bend to comfort instead of truth, then what happens next will hit close to home. Like the video, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices, because this story is only getting started, because the next won't stay quiet. What comes next is public, and humiliation is about to reach its peak. Final call for first class passengers. The announcement rolled through the gate with mechanical calm, indifferent to the tension it sliced open. Claudia Merritt stepped forward immediately, heels clicking with renewed authority. The earlier irritation in her face had settled into something colder, confidence sharpened by compliance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The system had already bent once, and that bend felt permanent to people like her. Naomi stood several feet away now, just beyond the velvet rope, near the wide glass wall that looked out onto the runway. The afternoon light reflected her outline faintly, a quiet silhouette framed by moving aircraft and blinking ground lights. Outside, planes followed exact instructions without commentary. Inside, everything was louder than it needed to be. "Miss," the supervisor said again, louder this time, his voice carrying farther than before. "As explained, you'll need to wait until all priority passengers have boarded." Naomi nodded. "I understand." Her voice remained even, almost gentle. That calm unsettled the people watching more than any protest would have. A woman adjusting her scarf whispered to her companion, "Why is this still happening?" Her companion replied, "Because someone doesn't know when to step away." Naomi heard that too. Claudia slowed at the entrance to the jet bridge, then stopped. She turned deliberately, her expression practiced, as if she were addressing an audience rather than a child. "Oh," she said with a small laugh. "She's still here." Several heads turned again. Phones lifted higher now, no longer discreet. Claudia placed a hand on her hip. This is exactly what happens when airlines stop enforcing standards. You get confusion, delays, and scenes like this. She gestured broadly, inviting the crowd into her narrative, all because someone decided the rules didn't apply to them. Naomi met her eyes, steady, unreadable. I followed every instruction I was given, Naomi said quietly. Claudia scoffed. That's what everyone says when they get caught pushing boundaries. She took a step closer, just enough to invade space without touching. You know what this looks like to everyone here? It looks like entitlement dressed up as innocence. A man near the gate whispered, "This is getting uncomfortable." "Yes," Claudia replied loudly, overhearing him. "It should be." The supervisor shifted from one foot to the other. "Ma'am, please proceed with boarding." "I will," Claudia replied, not moving. "But I'm not finished." She turned back to Naomi, her voice lowering, sharpening. "Do you understand how many people want these seats? How much they pay? And yet you stand here, delaying an entire first-class cabin, acting like you're owed something." Naomi inhaled slowly. She felt the eyes again, dozens of them, curious, judgmental, entertained. Public. Humiliation worked best when it was framed as inconvenience. "I'm not delaying anyone," Naomi said. "I stepped aside when asked." Claudia laughed softly. "That's not stepping aside. That's lingering." Security officers moved closer now, no longer pretending neutrality. Their presence shifted the moment from social discomfort to official pressure. "Miss," one officer said, "if you continue to disrupt the boarding process, we may need to escort you away from the gate." Disrupt. The word echoed. Naomi looked at him calmly. "I haven't disrupted anything." Claudia turned sharply toward the officer. "Exactly. Thank you. That's all I've been saying." She faced the supervisor again. This is where legal accountability begins, when airlines stop making exceptions because they're afraid of optics. The word optics drew murmurs. Claudia continued, louder now. Corporate negligence doesn't start with lawsuits. It starts with small failures. Staff hesitating, policies ignored, standards compromised. She gestured toward Naomi again, unapologetic. If this airline still believes in responsibility, it should act like it. Naomi felt the heat rise in the room, not toward her, but around her. People were uncomfortable, but discomfort alone rarely moved systems. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She didn't answer. She remembered her father's voice, calm and firm. "Let them show you who they are. Don't interrupt the evidence." Claudia stepped into the jet bridge again, then paused once more, savoring the attention. "Oh," she added casually, "one more thing." The entire gate looked up. She smiled thinly at Naomi. "Next time, dress the part. People might take you more seriously." A few gasps broke the air. Someone muttered, "That was unnecessary." Claudia shrugged. "Truth often is." The supervisor swallowed. He knew this had crossed a line. Everyone did, but lines blurred. When power stood confidently on one side, Naomi stood perfectly still. Humiliation pressed down on her, not because of the words alone, but because of the silence that followed them. Silence from staff, silence from authority, silence from people who knew better. Her grandmother's voice rose in her memory, steady and clear. "For the Lord loves justice, and he will not forsake his saints." Psalm 37:28. The verse grounded her. Justice wasn't loud, it was patient. A younger passenger finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "She didn't do anything wrong." The words hung briefly, fragile. Claudia turned sharply. "Excuse me?" The passenger shrank back. I mean, mind your business," Claudia snapped. "This doesn't concern you." The boarding agent announced again, more urgently now. "Final boarding call, gate closing." The jet bridge door began to slide inward. Naomi took a slow breath. She looked down at her phone. This time she answered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't turn away. She spoke softly, a few precise words, and then listened. No one else heard what was said. But the atmosphere shifted anyway. The supervisor straightened, Security paused. A boarding agent froze mid-step. Claudia felt it last, a flicker of unease crossing her face, quickly masked. Naomi ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She didn't move. She didn't speak. But something unseen had begun to move for her. The humiliation continued outwardly. Whispers, glances, judgment. But beneath it, the system had started to wake up. And for the first time since the scene began, Claudia Merritt no longer looked certain. If you've ever been humiliated in public while authority looked the other way, stay with us. Like the video, subscribe, and follow Dignity Voices, because silence is about to answer back. In the next story, no one raises their voice, but power begins to move, quietly. The gate did not close. That was the first sign something had changed. The jet bridge door had paused mid-slide, frozen as if waiting for an instruction it hadn't received yet. A soft chime echoed overhead. Not an announcement, not an alarm, just a system sound most people ignored. Naomi noticed. She always noticed small things. The room felt different now, not louder, not calmer, just alert. Like a breath held a second too long. She stood exactly where she had been, shoulders relaxed, hands loosely clasped, eyes steady. The humiliation had not disappeared, but it no longer pressed down on her the same way. It sat behind her now, recorded, witnessed, complete. Claudia Merritt shifted her weight, irritation creeping back into her posture. "What's the delay?" she snapped, glancing over her shoulder. The boarding agent didn't answer immediately. He was staring at his tablet, brow furrowed. Lines of text refreshed too quickly, then stopped. He blinked and refreshed again. Naomi said nothing. Security officers exchanged a look, the kind that came before instructions changed. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Just a moment, please." Claudia scoffed. "You've had more than enough moments." Naomi lifted her gaze, not to Claudia, but to the glass wall ahead. Beyond it, a plane taxied slowly into position, guided by lights embedded in the ground. Every movement was coordinated. Every signal mattered. Nothing was random. Inside the terminal, order had always existed, too. It just preferred not to be seen. The phone in Naomi's pocket vibrated again. Not urgently, not insistently. Once. Then stopped. She didn't reach for it. She remembered her father's rule. Never interrupt a system when it's correcting itself. Claudia tapped her foot. "If this is about that girl again, let me be very clear. I have meetings waiting on the other side of this flight. I will not be delayed." The supervisor nodded reflexively, then hesitated. He glanced at Naomi again, longer this time. Not suspicious, curious. Naomi met his eyes briefly, then looked away. She had learned that silence unsettled people more than defense. Silence forced others to fill the space with their own thoughts and their own doubt. The boarding agent's radio crackled softly. His expression changed. He muted it quickly, glanced around, then unmuted it again. His shoulders straightened. "Yes," he said quietly. "Understood." Claudia's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" The agent swallowed. "Just clarification." Naomi felt it then. Not triumph, not relief, alignment, like pieces sliding back into place. The supervisor took a half step forward. "Ms. Merritt, we're going to pause boarding for a moment." Claudia laughed incredulously. "You're pausing for her?" "No," the supervisor replied, slower now. "We're pausing for the system." That answer irritated Claudia far more than if he had argued. "The system works because people like me fund it," she snapped. Naomi kept her gaze forward. She thought of her grandmother's words again, not as comfort, but as instruction. Wisdom is found in quiet places. Around them, the crowd had grown restless. Phones were still raised, but the energy had shifted. This no longer felt like a spectacle. It felt like waiting for weather to change. A woman near the window whispered, "Something's happening." "Yes," her companion replied. "I think it already did." Claudia crossed her arms tightly. "This is absurd. First you let her disrupt boarding, now you're delaying me." Naomi turned her head slightly, not toward Claudia, but just enough for her profile to be seen. The movement was small, almost accidental, but it carried weight. Her eyes were calm, not defiant, not afraid, just certain. Claudia noticed. She faltered, just a fraction of a second, then recovered. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped. "You should be grateful I didn't have you removed completely." Naomi didn't respond. The silence stretched. That silence did something words couldn't. It reflected Claudia's voice back at her, stripped of authority. It made the insults feel exposed. The supervisor's tablet vibrated. He glanced down, then froze. Naomi saw the freeze. Security noticed too. "What is it?" Claudia demanded. The supervisor didn't answer right away. He looked up, not at Claudia, but at Naomi. There was no accusation in his eyes now, only recognition of possibility. "Miss," he said carefully, "could you please remain where you are?" Naomi nodded once. "Of course." Claudia laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. Unbelievable. The boarding agent received another message. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled. He glanced at the supervisor, then back at the screen. The radio crackled again. "Gate hold confirmed," a voice said quietly. "Do not proceed." Claudia stiffened. "Gate hold? For what reason?" The supervisor inhaled. "Operational review." That phrase landed differently. Naomi felt the system closing around the moment. Not to punish yet, not to reveal, but to observe. She stood there, still, composed, allowing everything that had happened to remain visible. She did not soften it. She did not escalate it. She let it stand as evidence. Claudia felt the shift now, too. Her certainty wavered, replaced by irritation that no longer produced obedience. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "I expect an explanation." The supervisor met her gaze evenly. "You'll receive one." Naomi looked down briefly, then back up. The humiliation was no longer hers alone. It had redistributed itself. The room fell quiet again, not with discomfort this time, but anticipation. Whatever had been triggered was not loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, and it was coming. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't move. She simply waited, calm as the runway lights beyond the glass, steady as systems that never needed to shout. The silence did not break. It deepened. What had once been an awkward pause at the boarding gate had transformed into something deliberate, structured, almost ceremonial. No announcements played. No boarding passes were scanned. The jet bridge remained open but inactive, like a door waiting for permission it had not yet been given. Naomi stood exactly where she had been instructed to remain. She had not shifted her weight. She had not crossed her arms. Her posture remained calm, neutral, patient. The posture of someone who understood that moments like this were not about reacting, but about allowing truth to arrive in its own time. Across the gate, Claudia Merritt paced once, then again, irritation sharpening her movements. "This is beyond unprofessional," Claudia said loudly. "I have never been treated this way by an airline." Her words echoed farther than she intended. No one rushed to reassure her. The supervisor closest to the gate listened quietly to his earpiece, nodding once, then again. His face no longer carried the strain of indecision. It had settled into something firm, procedural. "Yes," he said softly. "Confirmed." Claudia snapped her fingers. "Are you going to respond to me, or do I need to file a complaint right now?" The supervisor looked up at her evenly. "You will receive a response shortly." The neutrality of his tone unsettled her more than defiance ever could. Naomi felt the vibration of her phone in her pocket. Once, gently. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. That signal wasn't for urgency. It was confirmation. A second supervisor arrived, older, slower, with an authority that did not rush to announce itself. He surveyed the scene carefully. The paused jet bridge, The tense staff, the gathered passengers, the phones still recording. Then his eyes settled on Naomi. Not suspicious, attentive. "Thank you for your patience," he said to her. Claudia let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're thanking her?" The older supervisor turned calmly. "We're acknowledging cooperation." Naomi remained silent. The older supervisor cleared his throat. "Before boarding resumes, we need to address an issue that occurred at this gate." Claudia folded her arms. "Finally." He gestured lightly toward Naomi, not as an accusation, not as a spotlight, simply as a point of reference. "This passenger has been fully verified," he said. Claudia waved dismissively. "That was already established." "No," the supervisor replied evenly. "What was confirmed earlier was ticket validity. What we are clarifying now is identity." The word moved through the crowd like a ripple across still water. People leaned forward without realizing it. Naomi lifted her chin slightly, not in pride, not in challenge, simply in acknowledgement. Claudia frowned. "Identity? She's a child with a boarding pass. What exactly are you implying?" The supervisor paused, not for effect, but for precision. "She is Naomi Brooks," he said, "traveling under her legal name." Naomi inclined her head once. The supervisor continued, voice steady and unmistakably calm. "She is also the daughter of the majority owner of this airline." The silence that followed was absolute. It did not explode. It did not ripple. It settled. A woman near the window covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another passenger lowered their phone, suddenly unsure what they were recording anymore. Claudia's face drained of color. She shook her head slowly, as if the words were physically impossible to absorb. No, that can't be right." The supervisor met her gaze without emotion. "It is accurate." Naomi spoke for the first time since the revelation, softly, clearly. "I didn't come here to announce who I am," she said. "I came here to travel." Her voice was steady, controlled, carrying farther than shouting ever could. Claudia's composure fractured. "You let this happen," she said sharply, turning on the staff. "You humiliated her in front of everyone." The supervisor responded calmly. "No, ma'am. The events at this gate were not initiated by airline personnel." The implication landed without needing to be spoken. Naomi remained still, allowing the truth to exist without commentary. She did not defend herself. She did not correct the narrative. She let the evidence stand on its own. Claudia's voice tightened. "This is a misunderstanding." Naomi looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. "It wasn't," Naomi said. The older supervisor nodded once. "Boarding will resume shortly." He turned to Claudia. "However, due to conduct observed and recorded at this gate, your boarding privileges for this flight are suspended pending review." Claudia stared at him in disbelief. "You can't do that." "We can," he replied, "and we have." Security stepped forward, not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough to mark the boundary. The crowd murmured, not in shock now, but recognition. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. Naomi felt something release in her chest. Not triumph, but relief. The weight she had carried alone was now shared by the system that had witnessed it. Her grandmother's voice surfaced in her memory, steady and clear. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. Proverbs 12:19. Claudia was guided a few steps away, her earlier confidence drained, replaced by disbelief and fear of exposure. Cameras followed her now, but the story no longer belonged to her. The boarding agent cleared his throat. "We will now resume boarding." Passengers moved forward quietly, subdued, reflective. Naomi waited until the jet bridge cleared. When it was nearly empty, the supervisor turned back to her. "Your seat remains available whenever you're ready." Naomi nodded. "I'll board last." He inclined his head. Respect, not obligation. Naomi stepped forward, scanned her boarding pass, and paused at the threshold. She turned to the boarding agent who had hesitated earlier. "Thank you," she said simply. The agent nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Naomi walked down the jet bridge, not as a victor, not as a symbol, but as herself. Behind her, the gate resumed its rhythm, but nothing there felt ordinary anymore. The system had spoken, quietly. If you've ever stayed silent while the truth waited its turn, stay with us. Like the video, subscribe, and follow Dignity Voices. Because justice doesn't shout. In the next, the system responds. Not with anger, but with consequences. The aircraft door sealed with a subdued hiss, the sound barely audible over the low murmur of the first-class cabin. Inside, nothing felt celebratory. There was no applause, no whispered congratulations, no lingering looks of curiosity. Passengers settled into their seats with the kind of silence that follows a sudden storm, when everyone knows something significant has passed through, but no one yet understands the full damage it left behind. Naomi fastened her seatbelt and placed her hands neatly in her lap. She had boarded last, as promised, stepping into the cabin without announcement or expectation. The crew treated her with professional courtesy, no deference beyond what policy required, no awkward overcorrection. That mattered to her. It meant the system was already recalibrating, not bending in the opposite direction. Outside the window, the runway lights blinked in precise intervals, guiding the aircraft forward. The plane began to move. At the gate they left behind, the work had just begun. Claudia Merritt stood several corridors away now, no longer at the center of attention, but not yet invisible either. Security had guided her to a neutral room. White walls, glass panel, a single table. No restraints, no raised voices, just distance. "This is a misunderstanding," Claudia said again, pacing. "I expect this resolved immediately." The security officer did not argue. "You've been informed of the process, ma'am." That word, process, had followed her all afternoon. She pulled out her phone, scrolling rapidly, dialing contacts who had always answered before. This time, calls went to voicemail. Messages showed delivered but not read. At the operations wing of the terminal, screens refreshed quietly. Footage from the boarding gate queued itself automatically. Timestamps, audio channels, camera angles. Every insult, every pause, every moment of staff hesitation now existed as a record rather than a memory. An airline compliance officer reviewed the material with methodical calm. She did not flinch. She did not comment. "This qualifies," she said finally. "Escalate to ethics review." A supervisor swallowed. "Immediately?" "Yes," she replied. "Immediately." Miles away, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking another runway, Naomi's father watched the same footage with the same restraint his daughter had shown at the gate. He did not rewind. He did not pause. He allowed it to play straight through. Around him sat legal counsel, operations leadership, and senior compliance staff. No one spoke until the last frame ended. "Begin protocol," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, only clarity. Back at the airport, Claudia's phone rang at last. She answered without looking at the number. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said before the caller could speak. The voice on the other end was calm. "No, it's being documented." Claudia stopped pacing. "Documented how?" "As conduct," the voice replied. "As exposure. As risk." Her jaw tightened. "I have partnerships, contracts." "You have footage," the voice said evenly. "And witnesses." The line went dead. On board, the plane lifted smoothly from the runway, the cabin tilting almost imperceptibly as gravity released its hold. Naomi watched the ground fall away, the airport shrinking into geometry and light. She did not feel relief. She felt alignment. A flight attendant approached quietly. "Would you like anything to drink?" Naomi shook her head. "Water is fine." As the attendant placed the glass on her tray, she hesitated. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened earlier." Naomi met her eyes. "Thank you for acknowledging it." That was enough. In the terminal, supervisors were called in one by one, not reprimanded, not threatened, but reviewed. Policies were opened on screens. Language was highlighted. This isn't about blame, the compliance officer said. It's about responsibility. A training manager nodded. We failed to intervene. You hesitated, the officer corrected gently. And hesitation is a system flaw. Claudia sat down heavily now, her confidence eroding with every unanswered message. She scrolled through internal alerts she was no longer authorized to access. Her name appeared in them, not as a headline, but as a reference. Pending review, access suspended, privileges paused. Each phrase stripped a layer of assumed permanence from her status. On the plane, Naomi opened her laptop, not to watch anything, not to distract herself, but to write. Not accusations, notes, times, words spoken, who stood where, who looked away. Documentation mattered. She saved the file and closed the laptop again. At headquarters, legal counsel spoke calmly. We'll issue a holding statement. No names, no defensiveness. Another executive added, we initiate partner review quietly. Naomi's father nodded. Correct the system. Don't personalize the response. At the airport, Claudia was informed she would not be flying that evening. She laughed once, sharply. You can't seriously be doing this. The compliance officer met her gaze evenly. We are. On whose authority? Claudia demanded. The answer came without hesitation. The airlines. That distinction mattered. Claudia's voice dropped. This will follow you. The officer replied calmly, so will the footage. Silence followed. On board, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers shifted, some glancing briefly toward Naomi, then away again. There was no curiosity left now, only reflection. Naomi stared out the window at the clouds, their edges lit gold by the sun. She thought of her grandmother's words, not spoken today but carried through years. Justice is not loud. It is thorough. At the airport, internal emails circulated with precise language. No outrage, no emotion, just action. Effective immediately. Pending ethics review. Revised boarding escalation protocol. Claudia read none of them. Her phone buzzed again, this time from her own legal counsel. You need to prepare, the voice said quietly. This isn't going away. Claudia closed her eyes. On the plane, Naomi finally allowed herself to lean back, not in exhaustion, but in acceptance. She did not replay the humiliation. She did not savor the reversal. Justice had arrived not as an event, but as a process. And processes, once begun, did not stop halfway. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, Naomi looked forward, beyond the cabin, beyond the moment, toward what correction would look like when it finished its work, because this was not the collapse yet. This was preparation. The collapse did not arrive with sirens or shouting. It arrived quietly, in inboxes, on secure calls, in carefully worded memos that carried consequences heavier than outrage ever could. By the time Naomi's plane crossed its second time zone, the first internal bulletin had already circulated. Not public, not dramatic, internal. Pending ethics review initiated following conduct observed at Gate C-17. All partner privileges associated with the incident are suspended until further notice. No names were used. They didn't need to be. In corporate spaces, silence often spoke louder than press releases. At airline headquarters, compliance teams worked in controlled rhythm. Footage was cataloged, audio transcribed, timelines aligned. The incident at the gate was no longer a moment. It had become a case file. Every insult, every hesitation, every failure to intervene, each one labeled, each one time-stamped. The system was not angry. It was precise. Claudia Merritt sat in a private lounge hours later, staring at a tablet that no longer granted her access. Screens she once navigated freely now displayed neutral messages. Access restricted. Authorization required. Please contact administrator. She refreshed once, then again. Nothing changed. Her phone buzzed constantly now, not with reassurance, but with distance. One message from a board advisor stood out. This will be handled formally. Do not respond publicly. Claudia closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't being protected by proximity to power. She was being isolated from it. Back at the airport, supervisors who had stood silently during the humiliation were called into debrief rooms, not interrogated, not accused, but asked to recount what they saw and why they hesitated. One admitted quietly, "I didn't want to escalate." The compliance officer nodded. Escalation isn't the same as intervention. Another said, "I assumed someone else would step in." The officer responded calmly, "That assumption is how harm survives." Training modules were flagged for immediate revision. Escalation protocols were rewritten. Language changed from customer comfort to passenger dignity. No one was fired that day, but everyone was corrected. On the plane, Naomi sat with her window shade halfway open, watching the sky change color. She did not check the news. She did not track messages. She trusted the process she had been taught to trust. A man across the aisle leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Did you see what happened back there?" "Yes," she replied quietly. "I think things are changing." Naomi heard that. She didn't respond. She thought of her grandmother again, the way she used to speak about justice not as an event, but as a rhythm. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. Proverbs 21:15. The verse settled into her like confirmation, not triumph. At headquarters, Naomi's father declined interviews before they were offered. Legal counsel advised restraint. So did communications. "We don't need to speak," he said calmly. "The correction will speak for us." A senior executive hesitated. "The public may demand a statement." "They will receive one," he replied, "but not until the system finishes its work." By morning, word began to leak. Not headlines yet, but whispers in industry circles. A luxury CEO grounded, a partner under review, a gate incident triggering a governance audit. People in boardrooms recognized the signs. This wasn't scandal. It was structural. Claudia's name appeared in internal documents now, no longer followed by accolades but by qualifiers. Subject of review, conduct evaluation pending, risk exposure. She watched as allies distance themselves, some quietly, some abruptly. One longtime supporter sent a single sentence. "I can't intervene here." That hurt more than any public rebuke. At the airport, signage changed within days. Training posters replaced outdated slogans with clear language. Dignity is not optional. Authority requires accountability. Silence is a decision. Employees stopped in front of them longer than necessary. On board, Naomi's flight landed smoothly. She gathered her things without hurry, stepping into the aisle as passengers ahead of her paused, allowing her to pass first, not out of obligation but awareness. A flight attendant met her at the door. "Thank you for your patience," she said. Naomi smiled faintly. "Thank you for your professionalism." That exchange mattered. Outside the terminal, Claudia sat in a car she hadn't chosen, driven by someone she hadn't hired, heading somewhere she hadn't planned to be. Her phone buzzed again, this time from legal counsel. "You should prepare for formal questioning," the voice said, "and possibly public apology." Claudia laughed once, hollow, disbelieving. An apology. She had demanded them her entire career. Now one was being asked of her. At headquarters, a final internal memo was drafted. Not accusatory, not defensive. "We are committed to restoring trust through action. This includes reviewing conduct at all levels and reinforcing our responsibility to protect passenger dignity. No adjectives, no blame shifting, just responsibility." Naomi stood outside the terminal, breathing in unfamiliar air. Her journey paused briefly before continuing. She didn't feel victorious. She felt aligned with her values, with the system her father had built, with the quiet lessons passed down through generations. She remembered another verse her grandmother loved, one she used to repeat whenever the world felt unfair. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. That was the collapse. Not the fall of one person, but the dismantling of a pattern. Privilege exposed, silence corrected, systems reminded of who they were meant to serve. And as the sun dipped lower over the runway, Naomi walked forward, not to celebrate, not to explain, but to continue. Because justice, once awakened, does not end with one correction. It changes how everything moves afterward. 6 weeks later, the gate looked the same. Same glass walls, same polished floor, same muted announcements echoing overhead. Travelers still hurried past with rolling bags and half-finished thoughts, unaware of how much had changed beneath the surface. Naomi stood just outside the boarding area, unremarkable again, the way she preferred it. She was older now, not in years, but in understanding. The world had revealed itself to her not through cruelty alone, but through consequence. What had once been a moment of humiliation had become a marker, a quiet dividing line between how things were and how they would be. Inside the airline, the work had continued long after the cameras moved on. A settlement agreement had been reached quietly, without headlines, not as an admission of guilt, but as acknowledgement of harm. Funds were allocated not to silence, but to correction. Training programs, revised protocols, independent oversight. There was no victory parade, only repair. The airline released a short internal update the following week, careful in its language, deliberate in tone. It spoke of brand accountability, not as a marketing phrase, but as an obligation. Words like dignity, intervention, and responsibility appeared more than once. Employees read it slowly, some with relief, some with regret. The executive apology came later, not on a stage, not in a press conference. It arrived in writing, measured, restrained, stripped of excuses. Claudia Merritt did not mention intent. She did not defend herself. She acknowledged impact. She acknowledged silence. She acknowledged that power, when unchecked, had wounded more than it protected. It was not forgiveness, but it was truth. In the industry, people whispered about reputation management, but the whispers missed the point. This was not about restoring image. It was about restoring alignment between values and behavior, between policy and humanity. Naomi read the apology once. She did not respond. Forgiveness, she knew, was not a performance. At the airport, a small change caught her attention as she waited. Near the gate entrance, a new placard had been installed. Simple, unobtrusive. Passenger dignity is a shared responsibility. If you see harm, speak. People walked past it every day now. Some glanced at it, some slowed down, some read it twice. Naomi stood there quietly, watching. She remembered her grandmother's voice, steady and warm, the way it always sounded when she spoke of grace. Mercy and truth have met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed. Psalm 85:10. Grace, she had learned, was not weakness. It was completion. Naomi's phone buzzed gently, a message from her father. You did well, it read, not because of what not happened, but because of how you carried it. She smiled faintly. She thought of the moment at the gate, the eyes, the silence, the weight of being misunderstood. She thought of how easy it would have been to answer cruelty with exposure, humiliation with spectacle. But justice had not asked her to shout. It had asked her to stand. Across the terminal, a young girl waited nervously near a boarding sign, clutching her backpack too tightly. Naomi noticed the way she glanced at the rope, unsure whether she was allowed to stand where she was. A man beside her stepped aside slightly, making room. It's okay, he said kindly. You're in the right place. The girl nodded, relief washing over her face. Naomi looked away, heart full. That was the legacy. Not punishment. Prevention. When boarding was called, Naomi stepped forward with the rest. No one recognized her. No one stared. No one whispered. That anonymity felt like peace. As she walked down the jet bridge, sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long reflections on the floor. For a moment she paused, not for attention, but for gratitude. She whispered a final prayer her grandmother had taught her long ago, not asking for justice, but thanking God for it. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? Micah 6:8. She stepped onto the plane. The door closed, and the gate returned to what it had always been, a place of passage, no longer a place of harm. If this story moved you, if you've ever been judged before you were known, silenced before you were heard, or taught to endure quietly, remember this. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives correctly. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices for stories that honor truth, faith, and quiet courage. This story isn't just about an airline gate. It's about how God's justice works, not through revenge, but through restoration, not through pride, but through patience. When we choose restraint over rage, truth over ego, and grace over humiliation, we allow space for systems and hearts to change. May we all learn to stand with dignity, speak with wisdom, and trust that what is hidden will be revealed, and what is right will not be forgotten.